Thank you, Glenn. I have the pleasure to introduce you also to Diego Rubio. Diego Rubio is a professor at Instituto de Empresa and the executive director of its Center for Governance Change, the governance of change, where they study the best way for us to manage innovation and its externalities. I would like to start this debate about data and trust with a bit of a provocative standing point, which is the following. When I think of data and its privacy that arise as our major concern in this conference, in Europe we developed GDPR. GDPR is a very nice way to protect precisely privacy. And actually we have convinced people that data is a very valuable commodity, and it's the wrong commodity. It's theirs to part of or not. And we have also explained to them that some moguls at Silicon Valley have turned rich out of exploiting something that was actually the people's rather than them's. And now we get surprised when recently, and you were pointing this out yesterday, recently the National Statistics Institute in Spain wanted to collect data from telecom companies to help prevent traffic jams in towns, to help anticipate pollution, to solve it. And people didn't want to share the data because they expect to be compensated, because we convinced them data is his and they need to be compensated for that. In spite of this might be being a use case for the greater good. But we decided for a blanket regulation. How do we reconcile, and I know Diego is eager to answer that one because it touches a bit of a soft point with you. How do you reconcile this sort of blanket regulations that we now have in place in Europe with the possibility of us using data for the greater good? And who decides what's the greater good?
I think that's one of the greatest challenges, right? You're absolutely right. This worries me a lot. We've told people that data that it's created by them and therefore should be treated somehow, like some people say, as a commodity that should be handled by companies. Some other people said it should be treated as a private property and people should be fairly compensated for it. This is very dangerous because I don't think, first of all, is the right assessment of the nature of data, and therefore it leads us to a very complicated situation, as you were pointing out. I personally think, and we were talking about this yesterday, that data should be considered nor a commodity, nor private property, but a public good. Mm-hmm. And I think so for a number of reasons. One of the main ones being that it doesn't matter what people tell you, you're not generating data. That's not true. Data is generated through the interactions between people's behaviors and systems, could be more or less advanced technologically, that mine and structure and put that data into use. Systems that could be either owned and run by companies or by governments, but that at the end of the day are the result of a network of actors involved. And it's very hard to say whether this is really has been created by the public or the private or the people, right? So, you know, I think we should treat this as a public good. Mm-hmm. Obviously, as a public good, I'm not saying that no one should benefit from it. On the contrary, I'm saying that everybody, including companies, of course, but also governments should benefit from it. Saying the opposite and start talking about marketplaces, and which are great ideas, but I think they take us to a very complicated situation because, as you were saying, we have now this kind of data selfishness in which people don't want to share their data. And I think it's quite problematic. When you're a citizen and you're telling your government on the one side, I don't want you to use my data, even if it doesn't harm me at all, even if it doesn't cost me money, because data is not like oil. You can reuse it, data as many times as you want. So on the one hand, you're saying, government, I don't want my data to be used for a mobility study, And on the other hand, you're telling your government, I want you to solve problems such as climate change or inequality in cities. Well, you cannot have both, right? So we have to find a balance. And I will say just one last thing. I'm a historian by training. I've been working with data all my life, and not only economists work with data. To me, I never saw the data I was using as a private property or a commodity. I saw it as a public good that belonged to all humanity and that helped us to understand humanity either in the present time or in the past time.
So, what do you think?
Yeah, so I appreciate what Diego's saying. I actually think, unfortunately, if we were to adopt what he's saying, it would lead to a very, very dark world, unless we solve many other problems first. And we can talk about solving those other problems first, but I don't think we're making progress on it. The reason is that data is generated by every person in the same way that the work that they do is something that's available to every person. It's always been the case that labor income is far more equally distributed than capital income is. And if capital income grows as a share of the economy, we're going to end up in a world with extremely, extremely concentrated wealth, and one where the only option available to us is going to be something like a universal basic income or just immiseration of most of the population. And we are seeing that in the Silicon Valley world, that labor share is incredibly tiny. By making data a public good, what you would be saying is the only opportunity for ordinary people to receive an economic benefit from the digital economy would just be removed from them. And the only factor of production that would remain scarce would be capital that builds the computers that build. That's what that would result in. That would be extremely worrying. However, it's not just that it would be worrying from a distributive perspective. I think it would be devastating to the productivity of the AI economy as well. Why is that? Because while it's true that many different things participate in creating the value of data, that's always been true. If you go back and read any of the anarchists, they'll say that's true about everything that creates. However, without some reward for work, without some stake, without some dignity for individual people in the things that they're creating, people aren't going to create value. They're going to put, SHI*T posts all over the internet. They're going to have all sorts of fake news that they're propagating because they feel no stake and no responsibility for the things that they're actually creating. And I'll tell you, at Microsoft, we could benefit enormously from people being more engaged with the data that they're creating. People can, as they're writing a Microsoft Word document, explain why they're editing something in a way that they are. If people don't have any incentive, if people aren't even told, if they're said data is just like sunshine, data is just being created, data is just a public good, no one will have any stake in actually creating the value that is fueling AI.
But let me touch, sorry, Cristina, just one thing. Let me touch on that idea because I see your point, but I disagree with this fundamental principle. You're saying if people cannot profit economically from the data, then the quality of data that we gather on the internet, for instance, is going to fall. But actually, I think the opposite is happening. I mean, if you look at what has happened on the internet for the past 20 years, it's almost the opposite. For the first decades of the internet history, people were not benefiting from data at all, and data quality was actually quite good. When people went online to say whether they liked a movie or not, whether they like a product on Amazon or not, they were very honest about it. Since we've started to transform data, that kind of feedback, for instance, into money, the quality of that data has dropped dramatically. And nowadays, you cannot trust what you read on Amazon reviews, you cannot trust what you read on Google reviews, because all of them are lied, because all of them have been paid for some companies. So, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the opposite will happen. But
let me add some point to this debate, because you both know I'm a mathematician, so I really like my numbers and I really like my facts. If Google and Facebook were to distribute its entire EBITDA, earnings before interest and tax, among its customer base, assuming they work for the greater good of a customer base, each of us would receive the amazing amount of $10 from each of those companies per year, which is not maybe a good reason or a good enough reason for me to start modifying my behavior. So an economic compensation for data might not be what lots of people expect. Let me add some other question to this already.
I would push back on that quite a bit. And the reason is that we have an economy right now where the whole internet is free. You don't pay for your services and you don't get paid for the value you're contributing. That whole thing is off the books. It's like a shadow economy that we've created. And yeah, that means that currently the throughput is very small. What I want to see is the whole internet economy having the value actually be represented rather than being hidden. People should pay for their services and they should get paid. And the reason that we know that that would generate a lot of value is if we're really going to be in a world where a third, 60% of jobs are automated. And we know that that automation process currently has a labor share of 10%. If we started having that have a labor share of 70% like the rest of the economy, that's a huge amount of money. That's actually something like $20,000 to $25,000 per year for a typical family. So I think an estimate like that is much more realistic as to what would actually happen if we had a real economy that really valued people rather than a fake economy that's off the books and that tells people that they're useless. And then, oh, and it just happens that we're collecting all this information on you and that's fueling all of our stuff, but you're useless nonetheless.
I think he's dying to participate.
No, just one brief comment. I don't think, Glenn, it's true that people are not benefiting from all this information that they share. I mean, I don't want to defend Google or Facebook at all, but if you think in a small company based in Spain, they are benefiting dramatically just by using Google software, just by using Google Maps and Gmail and the searchers. That has boosted their productivity dramatically. And what are they paying exactly? It's not that much, as you said, and I'm pretty sure that any business or even any person in the world, if you ask him now, would you like to keep using Google for free, but we're going to keep using your data? Or you would rather get $10 and then the rest is you're going to have to pay for this. No one will take that deal. I'm not saying, of course, that the use of that data shouldn't be regulated or controlled, or that the way that Google is using that data is fair. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that perhaps what we have to do is to improve the system rather than change it dramatically, because so far it's been quite good. And we have to remember, last thing is I promise, all this data economy thing is not new. Every generation loves to think that we are the first one seeing something. We're not. This has already started in the 60s, in the 70s. Let me just remind you that, for instance, in 1964, there was Packard published this book on the naked society, in which he was basically saying that the new technologies will erode privacy dramatically and will cause tremendous situations in Western world. That was in 64. 65, Lyndon Johnson in the US, he suggested bring all the data sets of the federal government into one national data bank. This triggered a huge debate all over the country. As a result of that, the policy wasn't implemented, but the American government passed the Privacy Act 1974. What I'm trying to say is that this has been going on for the past 50 years or so. Obviously, the scale now is higher than 30 years ago. But it's been going on for 50 years, and what we have to agree upon is that so far, the overall result has been good, both for societies and for companies.
Been good. I think the results have been good to the extent that we have empowered a variety of pluralistic actors to actually have diffuse economic power and to bargain. The thing that has led to very bad results is when we've taken the attitude that people don't need any reasonable and proportionate economic stake in an activity, and that we can just put everything into a public vision. I mean, look, this is exactly the same thing that we tried, the experiments that we've tried with the Soviet Union, et cetera, when you just say, look, people will just do the right thing. Just don't worry about giving them any stake in the outcomes at all. Put everything into the public control. This is not a recipe for actually having a pluralistic society, as nice as it sounds. It's a recipe for actually immiserating ordinary people in the name of benefiting the public.
Glenn and Diego, I want to take advantage of your energy to bring in another heated topic on the table, which is artificial intelligence. And as of now, its regulation is not as advanced as it is on data privacy. But similarly, the same way that we have convinced people that it's their data and they should decide what to do with it, and therefore we have created a blanket regulation. In artificial intelligence, the gospel is very much about, well, since Terminator and the rise of Skynet, we have been afraid of the rise of the machines becoming smarter somehow than us, which is strange if you think that humans make the machines, and ultimately taking control over us. As such, it seems like we are reacting as well with another blanket regulation, and some call it trustworthy AI, some call it explainable AI, which is a way to tame this technology so that we keep the feeling that we control it. And I have a question for you. Do you think it is right to tame the technology no matter what, on a blanket way? Or would you think that, well, it depends on the use case? If it's a great technology to anticipate the onset of cancer in a number of years, you know, I don't really care if it's super explainable or not. I'd rather have it being accurate. So would you go for a use case type of reflection, or would you go blanket? Café for everyone, as we say in Spanish.
So I think that's a great question. Basically, you know, I agree with you in principle about the user case, but there are two buts here. One is that we need to be aware that it's very hard to understand how these things end up developing, right? So the problem is when you see how people expected technologies to evolve in the 90s and we see them now, they've evolved in a completely different way. So we have to be aware of this, that maybe when your NHS is giving data to DeepMind in order to, you know, enhance prediction for certain diseases, I think that's a great idea, of course. But we have to be aware, first of all, that you never know how that technology may evolve and how that data may end up using. So some sort of regulation should be there. The other thing I'm going to say, having Glenn here is going to be an interesting topic, is that I feel that one of the problems is that the general public has only two sources to understand what is the state of technologies such as AI. And that's science fiction movies, which is not a great source. And the other one is the announcements that technology companies make of these technologies, right? So we know how advanced Google's voice assistants are, not because we use them at that level, just because we see a promotional video from Google saying how it is. And this is very, very, very problematic, because these companies are, when they are making these videos, they're not there to inform the public, they're there to raise their value on the market. So they usually don't give a realistic state of the art of the technologies. Talking about AI, a lot of people believe now that we're very close to develop something called general AI, you know, a super intelligence that can do basically anything, right? We're very far from it. But when I say very far, I mean 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, we don't even know if it's possible. And this is important because AI systems make a lot of mistakes. That's why I think regulation, regardless user case, should be also in place, because they make a lot of mistakes. We have tons of examples every day, not of 10 years ago, but of last month, of big technology, big AI projects that make huge mistakes. Others make incredible advances and incredible things, of course, but you know.
So very briefly, what I would say is, look, I don't believe in taming technology. I believe in unleashing technology. But I believe that to unleash technology, we precisely do need to make it explicable. And I think, in fact, the thing that is taming technology that's holding it back is the attitude that the technology can do things completely independently and on its own. Programming languages were always most powerful to the extent that people are able to use them in creative new ways. What unleashed the smartphone? Was it BlackBerry that made the highest powered phone, or was it the iPhone, which people could actually use in novel ways. To me, what it takes to advance these technologies so that they actually have an impact on society is to make it so that many more people are able to use them in ways the designers cannot predict. And I think the fundamental problem that we have today is that the attitude around AI is an attitude of, we do it for you, autonomous systems, not an attitude of a tool that can be flexibly reused by a broad population. So I don't think it's about ethics. I think it's about making technology powerful by harnessing pluralism rather than harnessing sort of this we plan it all for you technocratic attitude.
I think it's a great way to finish this debate. And thank you very much. We were the only thing separating you from the coffee break, so please enjoy.